What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with the Borderlands 3 video for you guys, and today I figured it could be fun to go over what I think are some of the worst guns and weapons in Borderlands 3. Now real quick and before we start, due to the nature of Borderlands 3 getting patched fairly frequently, it is important to note that a number of the items I'm about to discuss here could actually end up being better now depending on when you see this video. Also, this video will be combining both legendaries and unique weapons together, with more emphasis on the latter as opposed to the former. And of course, it wouldn't be appropriate if I didn't talk about this, but definitely be sure to smash like on this video if you've found a pretty bad gun before, and failing that, let me know if you've managed to find the Super Mario Easter egg legendary in the comments section below. Otherwise, let's just go ahead here and get started with our number 10 entry, which is going to be the Omniloader. Now, supposed to be fair, it's not like this gun doesn't work correctly or anything. However, I do think it's fair to point out that the Omniloader has a pretty lame special effect and is also on the weaker side as far as the main quest rewards go. When it comes to criticisms of this special effect, being able to reload all equipped weapons by simply reloading the Omniloader isn't something you're going to really use all that much, unless you've got weapons that are really slow to reload like rocket launchers. In that case, the use you would have for this thing is pretty niche, and you're really just better off waiting the extra second or so that it will take to reload your rocket launcher. As for stats, the main issue with this thing is that it's a non-elemental weapon that will very likely get debuffed while playing in Mayhem mode. And even when it's not debuffed in Mayhem mode, I think you'll find that the Omniloader just doesn't hit quite hard enough to take down enemies quickly. So with that in mind, I simply think you can do better with just about any other weapon. Overall, I suppose you could do a lot worse, and thus that's why the Omniloader isn't really that high on this list. But again, just use anything else. I will admit that this thing is pretty hard to avoid since it's obtained during Chapter 14 of the main quest, but when you get it, you may want to sell it to make some space for some other weapons. Number 9. The Fingerbiter. Maybe it's just me, but using this thing is a real nail biter. While it's not totally awful under ideal circumstances in Mayhem mode, the problem is that normal type damage tends to get debuffed quite a bit, and on top of that, you have to deal with the quirks of the shotgun, which, in my humble opinion, are a hassle. Not only does the Fingerbiter have a magazine size of 1, but there are a number of other problems that center around the projectiles. Not only are these projectiles difficult to see and fairly slow moving, but they also have a really short distance they can travel before you start to see some bullet drop. So if you plan on using this thing at any range other than point blank, you may find it's going to be difficult to try and hit the target. Now it is worth noting that you do get some ricochet potential with the Fingerbiter, which doesn't make the gun worse. However, keep in mind that the bullet drop also applies to those ricochets as well, which can make those ricochets a little bit harder to use. In the end, and if you ask me, while you're doing the On the Bloodpath side quest on Eden 6, which can award the Fingerbiter, I just recommend you side with the other guy so you can get the Brawler Impaler shield. I suspect the Brawler Impaler will be more useful to melee builds than the Fingerbiter is going to be to gun builds. Number 8. The Widowmaker. As far as legendary and unique grenades I've come across go, the Widowmaker seems to be one of the most flawed. When thrown, the Widowmaker will stick to the surface in question, and after a period of what feels like forever, a rocket will shoot up, split into 3, and then those remaining rockets will home in and deal damage to enemies. Now obviously, the amount of time it takes for this thing to go off is a massive problem. After all, during this time, enemies can move outside the effective range of the grenade or recovery portion of their shield. However, probably the biggest issue involves the complications that can arise from how the Widowmaker sticks to surfaces. When that initial rocket launches, it will go straight out from the surface it lands on, meaning that if the Widowmaker sticks to an enemy, the grenade could potentially send the initial rocket right into the ground, dealing no or only a fraction of the damage it might normally deal. Otherwise, I think it's fair to say that many of the other legendary and unique grenades you can obtain are simply better. After all, many of them are easier to use, and you won't have to wait a year for them to actually go off. Maybe this thing will get patched at some point in the future and it ends up becoming massively overpowered, but for right now, I think you can agree that the Widowmaker is just best avoided. Number 7. The Ghetto Burger. While it would be easy for me to just say that the Ghetto Burger is the ultimate in vegan repellent technology and be done with it, I think the Ghetto Burger merits a little more analysis than that. As you can see, it's a corrosive launcher that has hamburgers all over it, and when fired, it launches hamburgers at enemies. What's interesting about these hamburger projectiles, though, is that they appear to bounce or skip along the surfaces that they hit. Each time the hamburgers bounce, it leaves a bullet mark on the ground, which means the Ghetto Burger's projectiles can hit more than once every time they are fired. The issue, however, is that the projectiles have a small blast radius and seem to work best at a greater distance, where the bounce seems to be the least pronounced. When fired up close, the hamburgers have a tendency to bounce off and away from targets, and given the small blast radius, it makes taking advantage of the bouncing/skipping effect way more difficult. If you ask me, if you're looking for a decent launcher in this game, I think you could simply do much better than the Ghetto Burger. And on top of that, whatever you find will probably be in the element you'll want. But if you want to try this thing, you can always complete the Dynasty Diner side quest in the Meridian Metroplex on Promethea. Number 6. The Tunguska. For those of you that are familiar with Borderlands 2, you'll likely recognize this weapon. However, and for those of you that don't, the Tunguska is a launcher that fires rockets that will hit a surface during its first phase and deal a little bit of damage. However, and for the second phase, a secondary rocket will rise up from that initial explosion and explode in the air, dealing the bulk of the damage. Now in Borderlands 2, the Tunguska suffered greatly from Phase 2 in particular because the blast radius was really large and the player could instantly get downed due to the fact that they couldn't properly estimate the blast radius. Fortunately, this aspect has been rectified, however the issue now is that the Tunguska is simply on the weaker side as far as launchers go. Even with the ×2 projectile multiplier like you're seeing here, the Tunguska comes up short against respectable legendary launchers like the Quatomizer or Scourge, which easily have the edge when it comes to base damage. Add on the fact that these other legendary launchers' effects are more immediate, and it begs the question of why you would want to use the Tunguska. As I said previously, and to be fair, a lot of the major problems with the Tunguska have been fixed in Borderlands 3. However, I think it's fair to say that it just comes up short when compared to other legendary launchers. Hopefully it will get massively buffed in the future, but for now it's kinda lame if you ask me. Number 5. Brash's Dedication. So, the Brash's Dedication has gotta be one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. Typically with snipers, you either get to fire one or more projectiles in a relatively tight grouping that ensures the most damage possible. However, with the Brash's Dedication, you're getting these weird spiraling projectiles around the main one, which, as you might guess, are really difficult to be accurate with. They usually work best at certain distances, or if you try to kind of aim down and arc the projectiles into an enemy's crit spot. However, if you're using this thing against regular bandits or Maliwan soldiers, you're usually going to have a hard time. And if you try to use it conventionally, you stand the chance of cutting the Dedication's damage potential by almost 67%. Add on a few other undesirable aspects, like how the Dedication has low base damage before the multiplier, and the Shock and Corrosive Elemental Ultifier modes have different magnifications, and I think you'll agree that this thing is pretty lame. If you want to get your hands on the Brash's Dedication, it's acquired from a side quest that shares the same name. In order to perform the Headcase side quest, you'll need to travel to Ascension Bluff on Pandora and beat Mouthpiece. Once you do, you should be able to access the quest, and once you complete it, you'll receive the Brash's Dedication as a reward. Number 4. TKs Wave. Even though it's a staple of pretty much every Borderlands game released so far, and it's not really a Borderlands game if you don't have one of these, I still think it's fair to say that the TKs Wave is still pretty bad. For those that are unfamiliar with the TKs Wave, it's a shotgun that fires projectiles in a horizontal wave style pattern that can ricochet off of surfaces. As you can see, these projectiles can be really difficult to be accurate with, since the wave pattern is fairly unpredictable. Even at level 24 or so, and against level 24 enemies, you can see that I'm spending a lot of time just trying to hit them, let alone trying to deal critical damage. Add on the horizontal spread of that projectile pattern, and I think you'll quickly find that you're ready to use just about any other shotgun you can find after using a TKs Wave. Ultimately, I won't go too hard on this one, since many of you already likely knew that TKs Wave or the Tidal Wave was never really that great to begin with, but I definitely think it's fair to say that it's one of the more undesirable legendaries in this game. Hopefully you don't get one, because it will be pretty groan-worthy. Number 3. the Peacemonger. So I should say that I actually like Atlas gear quite a lot in Borderlands 3. The ability to tag enemies and have the bullets go directly to or near that particular spot is pretty awesome. However, and with this in mind, I have to wonder why the Peacemonger is the way it is. For the uninitiated, the Peacemonger fires a large rocket that will then explode, turning into 4 smaller rockets which fire outward diagonally. These 4 smaller rockets can potentially home in on enemies, but more often than not, what happens is that the Peacemonger's rockets usually end up missing entirely and end up either hitting the floor or a wall. This is pretty disappointing when you consider that if the Peacemonger had a tracker mode, that you could fire the tracker at a crit spot and then fire the Peacemonger's projectile straight up into the air and let the 4 homing projectiles do all the work. Maybe the Peacemonger was just too powerful as is and Gearbox decided to change it, but alas, I do have to admit that I was pretty disappointed when I first received this thing upon completing Ratchet Up at the Atlas HQ on Promethea. Again, like some of these other guns I've discussed so far, maybe this will get improved with time, but at least for now, the Peacemonger seems pretty bad to me, and I think you could do a heck of a lot better as far as quest rewards go. Number 2. The Chocolate Thunder. So this grenade is obtained by completing the Just Desserts side quest in the Splinterlands on Pandora, and is literally a piece of cake. When thrown, it explodes upon impact with any surface, including enemies, meaning that the damage dealt here is instant. However, while this may sound pretty good, the issue is that the Chocolate Thunder deals fairly low damage, and the blast radius on the grenade itself is pretty low too. So unlike other grenades, which usually cover a fairly respectable area in which they can deal damage, the Chocolate Thunder has a very small area, and while that fact wouldn't be a problem if the grenade itself dealt a tremendous amount of damage, unfortunately it just doesn't. Ultimately, I think you'll agree that the Chocolate Thunder really isn't very good. While I guess that could potentially be changed in the future with a patch, at least for now, I think it would be better using just about anything else. Whether it be some of the other grenades you get by completing quests, or just some grenades that randomly appear on the ground. And for our final entry, number 1, the Storm. Wait a minute, the Storm sniper rifle is back in Borderlands 3? How did this happen? What a boatload of... Excuse me, I momentarily lost it there. Somehow, some way, this sniper managed to return from Borderlands 2 and make it into Borderlands 3. While it is nice to see many returning weapons like the Tsunami, Conference Call, and others, it was generally agreed upon that the Storm was one of the worst guns in Borderlands 2, and failing that, it was one of the worst pearlescents and just worst snipers from that game. In Borderlands 3, it returns as the Legendary with its signature attribute of emitting Tesla orbs whenever the initial projectile hits a surface or enemy. These are upgraded somewhat as it appears they can now crit and they last a little bit longer. However, given that they are stationary, enemies can easily walk outside of their radius, thus making this attribute difficult to take advantage of. However, I'd say the issue with this thing this time around has to do with its charging. While many Maliwan weapons need to be charged or revved up in order for them to start firing, the Storm charges and then immediately fires rather than allowing you to hold the trigger down like you might see on the Seleki protocol. Or in the case of something like the Legendary Krakatoa, where it kind of has to charge up and then it will start firing until the magazine is emptied, the Storm has to be literally charged for each shot. So not only do you have little control over when the projectile is actually fired, but you're also in a situation where if you need to get a lot of quick shots off, you can't because you have to charge between each shot. As you can imagine, this is a huge problem for any sniper rifle, since being able to fire immediately, or failing that, being able to fire at the precise moment in time is key. And because you can't really do this with the Storm, I think it's fair to say that the Storm is pretty terrible. Now, I will admit that this thing does look a little bit better than it did before, as it's got a cool weapon skin, and the base damage on it isn't too bad. However, I think it's something you're definitely still going to want to avoid. Hopefully you'll never come across this thing, as in my opinion, it is a pretty terrible sniper. Alright guys, thank you all for watching, and I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to smash like, Click the bell so you can be notified when I upload my next video. And as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.